Your own stepson betrayed you, but the real nightmare isn't the eviction. It's the ancient creature stirring beneath your mansion. The air in the mahogany-paneled study always smelled faintly of old leather and regret. I was sitting there, nursing a lukewarm scotch, trying to reconcile the fact that the very house I'd built with my own 2 hands, the sprawling estate I'd lovingly filled with memories and expensive antiques, was no longer legally mine. It belonged, as of 3 weeks ago, entirely to Lucas. Lucas, my stepson. He was 22, sharp-featured, and possessed the cold, calculating eyes of a vulture sizing up carrion. My late wife, Eleanor, bless her overly trusting soul, had insisted on adding him to the deed shortly before she passed from that aggressive cancer. She'd wanted him to have security. She'd whispered on her final rattling breath. I, heartbroken and blinded by grief, had signed the necessary papers without reading the fine print. The fine print that, as it turned out, stipulated that upon my permanent relocation or inability to maintain the property to her stated standards, the controlling interest would revert solely to her only child, Lucas. And Lucas, conveniently, had decided that my standards involved leaving the plumbing unchecked for 6 months and allowing the ancient oak on the west lawn to rot. He'd had the paperwork served on my 50th birthday. "It's just paperwork, Dad," he'd purred over the phone yesterday, the word Dad tasting like ash in his mouth. "But legally, this is my investment now. You're welcome to rent the guest wing, provided you keep the noise down and stop touching my mother's silver." I gripped the tumbler tighter. I'd been trying to fight it legally, but Eleanor's lawyer, a smug shark named Henderson, had assured me the trust was airtight. I was being evicted from my own life. Tomorrow morning, I was supposed to meet with a realtor Lucas had hired to evaluate options for downsizing my lifestyle. Downsizing. I was Arthur Hemlock, CEO of a mid-sized engineering firm, and I was about to be homeless in my own backyard. I sighed, running a hand over my thinning hair. The house felt haunted, not by Eleanor, but by Lucas's predatory presence. I pushed myself up, intending to go to bed and escape the suffocating silence, when my eye caught something unusual resting on the edge of the grand fireplace mantel. It wasn't dust, nor was it one of Eleanor's decorative porcelain birds. It was an envelope, thick, cream-colored, and sealed with a deep, almost black wax stamp featuring an unfamiliar crest, a coiled serpent wrapped around a key. I hadn't seen it before. I certainly hadn't put it there. Lucas rarely used this study. He preferred the modern, sterile guest house by the pool. Curiosity, the last vestige of my old adventurous spirit, pricked at me. I picked it up. It felt heavy, expensive. There was no postage, no address written on the front, just my name, inscribed in looping, elegant script that definitely wasn't Eleanor's handwriting or Lucas's clumsy scrawl. Mr. Arthur Hemlock. My heart gave a nervous flutter against my ribs. Who would leave something so deliberately hidden, yet so prominently displayed? I turned it over. The wax seal was warm to the touch, almost as if it had been sealed moments ago. Ignoring the sudden icy dread creeping up my spine, I used the heavy letter opener from my desk to carefully crack the seal. The paper inside was parchment, crisp and smelling faintly of ozone. I unfolded the single sheet, my eyes scanning the dense, precise, typewritten words. The first paragraph was innocuous enough, a formal address. The second, however, slammed into my reality like a freight train. Mr. Hemlock, it has come to my attention that your current residency is under contestation by Mr. Lucas Thorne, your stepson. While this legal maneuver is predictable, it is also entirely predicated on a fundamental, yet easily corrected, misunderstanding of the estate's true origins. Misunderstanding? My misunderstanding. Eleanor and I had been married for 10 years. The house was built with my money after we married. I kept reading, my breath catching in my throat. The property known as Blackwood Manor, and indeed the entire underlying parcel, was never solely the asset of Mrs. Eleanor Thorne, née Vance. It was in fact collateral against an agreement made decades ago with Mr. Elias Thorne, Lucas's biological father whom you believe to be deceased. Elias Thorne, Lucas's father. Eleanor had always maintained Elias had died in a boating accident in the Caribbean 15 years ago, long before I met her. Lucas had been raised by his aunt, and Eleanor always told his father was gone. I felt a sudden, intense wave of nausea. I leaned against the desk, the parchment trembling in my hand. The letter continued, the typewritten words seeming to vibrate with urgency. Elias Thorne is not only alive, Mr. Hemlock, but he has recently returned and is demanding the immediate forfeiture of all assets currently held under his previous covenant. This covenant, which predates your marriage, stipulates that if Elias Thorne reappears and provides proof of identity, which he has done, then all connected holdings, including Blackwood Manor, must revert immediately to his direct lineage, bypassing Eleanor's recent bequests entirely. Lucas is merely the temporary custodian, the true claimant. The one who currently holds the rights under the original contract is awaiting your contact. My mind raced, trying to process the impossible. Elias Thorne, alive? And if he was alive, and if this letter was true, Lucas's claim was temporary, a legal formality based on a false premise. But the final sentence was the one that made the Scotch glass slip from my numb fingers, shattering on the Persian rug. He requests you meet him immediately tonight, at the only place Elias Thorne ever considered truly home. You will find the coordinates hidden within the compartment behind the portrait of Eleanor's grandmother in the main hall. I stared at the note, the silence in the house suddenly thick with menace. I knew the portrait. It was tucked away in a seldom-used alcove. If I followed this, I might save my home. If I ignored it, I might be handing my entire life over to a ruthless man whose existence I never knew existed. My decision had to be instantaneous. Heart pounding, I stumbled out of the study and headed toward the main hall, praying that the hidden compartment still contained what this mysterious letter claimed it did, because if I went up there and found nothing, then I heard it. The distinct, slow crunch of tires pulling onto the gravel driveway, followed by the heavy thud of an expensive car door closing. Lucas was back, and he wasn't alone. I glanced desperately towards the main hall alcove, realizing I had mere seconds to see if this improbable lifeline was real, or if I was about to be confronted by Lucas and whatever dark secrets his returned father had brought with him. My legs felt like lead, but adrenaline was surging through my system, chasing away the numbness of the scotch. I didn't dare turn on the hall light. The sudden illumination might draw attention to the alcove where Eleanor's severe-looking grandmother hung, judging the unfolding chaos below. The crunching footsteps weren't just Lucas's heavy designer boots. There was a second set, lighter, quicker, and purposeful. They were moving fast, not strolling back from a late dinner, but advancing with intent. I flattened myself against the cool plaster wall beside the portrait, my gaze locked on the front door's small, ornate peephole. Through the distorted lens, I could see Lucas standing stiffly, his posture unnaturally rigid. Beside him stood a man who was clearly not Lucas's usual entourage of fraternity brothers or low-level associates. This man was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that looked tailored from shadow, and he held himself with an almost predatory stillness. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking through it, assessing the architectural integrity of my home. Elias Thorne. I knew it instinctively. The eyes that swept over the porch railing were the same icy blue I'd once seen in a faded photograph Eleanor kept hidden in a jewelry box, a photograph she'd claimed was of a distant cousin. I had to check the compartment now. My fingers fumbled behind the thick, gilded frame of the portrait. The wood paneling felt solid, immovable. Panic tightened its grip. Had Lucas found the letter first and removed whatever was hidden behind it? Or had the letter writer, knowing the risk, ensured the compartment was already empty? I ran my fingers frantically along the edges, searching for the subtle seam, the almost invisible release mechanism mentioned in countless old thriller novels I used to read. Nothing. My mind screamed, "It's too late." You hesitated. Just as I was about to yank the portrait clean off the wall in desperation, my middle finger brushed against a minuscule, almost microscopic button disguised as a decorative nail head near the bottom right corner. I pressed it. With a faint, dry click that sounded deafening in the tense silence, a narrow section of the paneling slid inward, revealing a dark recess. My hand plunged inside, closing around two objects, a small antique brass key and a folded piece of aged vellum, brittle with time. I tucked the key into my pocket and unfolded the vellum, shoving it into my trouser pocket just as the main lock on the front door began to rattle violently. Lucas wasn't bothering with formalities anymore. "Dad! Arthur!" Lucas's voice boomed, laced with a dangerous excitement I'd never heard from him before. "Don't be foolish. We know you're in there. We just need to conduct a quick security sweep before the official transfer tomorrow. Let us in, or we'll have the locksmith out. And trust me, you don't want Mr. Elias Thorne waiting on my front porch for very long." Mr. Elias Thorne. The name was spoken with reverence by Lucas, utterly devoid of the contempt he usually reserved for me. They were working together. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. Lucas hadn't been trying to steal the house from me. He had been preparing it for his father. I backed away from the hall, scrambling toward the kitchen access to the basement stairs. My only viable escape route. The rattling at the door stopped abruptly. Silence again. A silence far worse than the noise. Then, a sound that turned my blood to ice. The heavy, deliberate thud of a powerful shoulder hitting solid oak, followed by a sharp, splintering crack. Lucas wasn't waiting for a locksmith. He was proving a point. I reached the top of the basement steps and threw open the door. The smell of damp earth and concrete rushed up to meet me. I peered down into the gloom, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was pitch black, save for the faint, dusty glow filtering from the high, small windows near the ceiling. Before I could descend, a beam of blinding white light stabbed down from the kitchen doorway above me, momentarily paralyzing me. "Stop right there, Arthur," came the voice of Elias Thorne. It was deep, resonant, and carried an unnerving authority. "That little note suggested you were receptive to reason. Clearly, I overestimated your intelligence. You've picked up the bait, but you haven't taken the hook." The light held me pinned. I could see Lucas standing just behind his father, a smug, triumphant smirk plastered across his face, holding a heavy-duty flashlight. "The key, Arthur," Lucas demanded, stepping forward. "We know you took the key. Hand it over. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, but this is family business now. Your business is packing." I instinctively shielded my pocket where the brass key rested, the small, cold metal suddenly feeling like the most valuable object on earth. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. Elias's voice cut through the tension, softer now, but infinitely more menacing. "That key," Elias said, his voice dropping to a persuasive murmur, "opens the safe deposit box where Eleanor stored the original deed, the one that proves I never legally ceded my rights to the land, only the structures built upon it after 1998. You try to run, Arthur, and I'll have the lawyers bury you in litigation until you're living in a cardboard box under the very oak tree Lucas was so conveniently neglecting." He gestured toward the darkness of the basement. "Go down there, Arthur. If you have any sense left, you'll wait for us. We can discuss the terms of your departure quietly. If you try to leave this property without my direct permission, however—" Elias paused, allowing the threat to hang in the stagnant air. "Let's just say Lucas will have his clearance to bring in professional removal specialists by dawn, and they won't be as gentle as I am being right now." I looked at the gaping, dark maw of the basement steps, my only immediate route of escape, and then back up at the cold, unified front of my stepson and the father I never knew he had. I had the key, but they clearly knew what it unlocked, and they were confident I wouldn't dare leave without knowing the full story. If I stayed, I was trapped. If I ran, they had justification to treat me as an intruder. Then, from the deepest corner of the basement, barely audible over the frantic thumping of my heart, I heard a faint, metallic scrape, a sound like something heavy being dragged across concrete floor, directly below where I stood. It was coming from a section of the foundation I always thought was solid rock. It sounded like someone or something was already down there, waiting for the confrontation upstairs to conclude. Elias and Lucas hadn't noticed it. They were too focused on me. My decision solidified. Running wasn't just about escaping them. It was about finding out what else was hidden in the foundation of Blackwood Manor. I took one last defiant look at the pair blocking my exit, and with a sudden surge of desperate energy, I dropped into the darkness of the basement, tumbling down the first few steps. The sound of the scrape came again, closer this time, accompanied by a low, guttural moan that was definitely not human. I hit the cold concrete floor of the basement with a jarring thud, the impact rattling my teeth and sending a fresh wave of pain shooting up my ankle. The darkness below was absolute, a suffocating blanket that swallowed the thin beams of light filtering from the kitchen above. I scrambled backward on hands and knees, adrenaline burning away the immediate pain of the fall. "He went down!" Lucas yelled from the doorway above, his voice echoing sharply off the stone walls. "Get the tactical lights, Dad! Don't let him touch anything!" Elias's voice, calmer but laced with lethal impatience, followed. "Stay put, Arthur. You make one move toward the exterior exits, and I assure you the consequences will be swift. We are going to have a civilized discussion about a very old contract." The light beams shifted wildly overhead as they searched for the basement light switch, painting ghostly, shifting landscapes of forgotten furniture, cobweb-draped wine racks, and the looming shadows of my own stored memories. I pressed myself against a stack of moth-eaten steamer trunks, listening intently. The metallic scrape had definitely come from deeper within, near the unused coal chute area that was bricked over decades ago. My hand instinctively went to my pocket. The brass key was there, warm now against my palm, but the vellum note, the coordinates for Elias, was also there. I couldn't risk opening it now. The sound of tearing paper might give away my position. As Elias and Lucas began their descent, their heavy footsteps on the wooden stairs sounding like an executioner approaching, I realized the darkness was actually my only ally. I needed to get to the back wall, near the foundation, where I'd heard that strange noise. I crawled silently beneath the low-hanging beams, moving away from the staircase. The air grew colder as I neared the back of the cellar, the smell of damp earth intensifying, overlaid with a distinct, sharp, coppery odor. "He's not by the stairs, Lucas," Elias observed dryly, his voice now closer than I wanted. "He's smart enough to know running means nothing. He's heading for the back." I froze. How could he know that? Unless the letter writer knew precisely where I would go. I reached the cinder block wall where the old coal chute was supposedly sealed. I ran my hands over the rough surface, searching for any indentation, any sign that this wall wasn't solid. Suddenly, my fingers brushed against something smooth and cold embedded in the mortar. A small, almost invisible handle, perfectly aligned with the location on the vellum map I hadn't yet dared to read. I gripped the handle, pulling it sharply inward. Instead of the expected solid resistance, the central section of the cinder block wall swung inward with surprising ease, revealing a narrow, pitch-black passage sloping downwards. The metallic scrape was loud now, echoing from within the hidden tunnel, along with that unsettling, wet moan. This wasn't just a secret room. This was a pre-existing exit, hidden long before I ever bought the property. "He found it!" Lucas shouted, his voice edged with panic. "He's going into the old tunnels! Father, stop him!" I heard Elias curse, a sharp, unfamiliar sound that didn't sound like a civilized businessman at all. He clearly knew what this passage was. I didn't wait. I slid through the opening, pulling the handle hard in the opposite direction. The stone slab swung shut with a resounding thud, plunging me into absolute sensory-depriving blackness. I fumbled for the small emergency pen light I always kept clipped to my belt loop, flicking it on. The beam cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing a narrow, crudely excavated tunnel sloping sharply downward. The walls were rough stone, slick with moisture. The coppery smell was overwhelming here, and the moaning, it was unmistakably a sound of distress, or perhaps captivity. I took 2 stumbling steps down the incline. The tunnel floor was uneven, littered with debris, and I had to use my hands to brace against the slimy walls. Then, the light caught something just ahead. It was a shape. Humanoid slumped against the far wall of the tunnel, seemingly unconscious or too weak to move. As I crept closer, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I saw the thing was shackled. Thick, rusted iron cuffs bound its wrists to a pipe jutting out from the wall, and pinned to its tattered, filthy shirt was a small, square photograph. I reached the figure, my light fixed on the photograph. It was old, faded, but undeniably clear. A much younger Elias Thorne, looking exactly like the man who had just been searching for me upstairs, standing proudly beside a beaming Eleanor, and in Eleanor's arms, cradled like an infant, was a little boy with Lucas's distinctive blue eyes. But it wasn't Lucas. The inscription scrawled on the back of the photo in Eleanor's shaky hand read, "My first, my mistake. Forgive me, Elias. He's safe now." I stared, bewildered. Lucas wasn't Elias's son, not the one Eleanor had raised anyway. Lucas was a placeholder? A legal maneuver? If this man in the tunnel was Elias's true heir, the one mentioned in the letter? Suddenly, the figure in the shackles stirred. Slowly, agonizingly, the prisoner turned its head toward my beam of light. The face was skeletal, covered in grime and years of neglect. But the eyes, those unmistakable piercing blue eyes, flickered open. They weren't looking at me with recognition or hope. They were looking past me, directly at the stone slab entrance I had just sealed. And then, the prisoner whispered, a dry, rasping sound that barely disturbed the dust. He's not trapped out there, Arthur. He's been waiting for you to open the way for him. Before I could process the horrifying implication of his words, that Elias had sealed someone else down here to keep them quiet while he manipulated the estate, the stone slab behind me shuddered violently. It didn't just rattle. It was being struck from the outside with impossible force, a deep, rhythmic thud, thud, thud that vibrated through the stone and into my very bones. Then the prisoner in the shackles gave a terrible, high-pitched shriek of pure terror, not directed at the noise outside, but at something else moving in the utter blackness behind me, deeper within the tunnel. The shriek of the prisoner, the true air, I suddenly realized with sickening clarity, was the sound of absolute primal fear. It ripped through the suffocating silence of the tunnel, overriding the heavy battering against the stone slab behind me. I spun around, the weak beam of my penlight sweeping wildly across the narrow passage. The light caught only slick, wet rock and the deep downward slope of the floor. But the air had changed. The metallic tang of copper was now mixed with something intensely sulfuric, something hot and wrong. The prisoner, the one shackled to the pipe, was clawing desperately at his iron bonds, his eyes wide and fixed on the space directly behind me, where the tunnel seemed to curve away into deeper shadow. He wasn't afraid of Elias and Lucas breaking in. He was terrified of what was coming out of the darkness he'd been confined to. "Get out!" the prisoner choked out, his voice cracking like dry kindling. "It's hungry. He left it for the bloodline." I didn't need further urging. The battering at the stone door intensified. Elias and Lucas were using something heavy now, perhaps a crowbar or an axe, determined to reach me. But the sound behind me, the growing, wet sound of something dragging itself over the debris-strewn floor, was infinitely more terrifying. I backed away from the prisoner, stumbling over loose rock, my penlight beam bouncing frantically. The sulfuric smell was overpowering, stinging my eyes. I swung the light toward the source of the noise, and my breath hitched, a silent scream trapped in my throat. It wasn't Elias's secret security system. It wasn't a dog or a trap. It was something that moved with a sickening, undulating rhythm, low to the ground yet immense. It reflected the light weakly, its surface appearing wet and segmented, like the shell of some colossal subterranean insect. It didn't have discernible limbs, only thick, muscular folds propelling it forward in a sluggish but inexorable advance. And as the light hit its front mass, I saw them, clusters of small, multifaceted lenses that weren't eyes, but reflected the light back like oily mirrors. This was not a man-made threat. This felt ancient, dredged up from the very bedrock beneath Blackwood Manor. The prisoner behind me started screaming again, a long, high-pitched wail that ended abruptly in a sickening crunch. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I focused solely on scrambling further down the tunnel, away from the entrance, away from Elias, away from the horror that Elias had clearly left caged down here. My foot connected with something solid, a flat surface. My penlight beam revealed a heavy iron hatch set into the floor of the tunnel, secured by a thick, rusting bolt lock. It had to lead somewhere else, Perhaps an escape route that even Elias hadn't anticipated me finding. Above me, the stone slab finally yielded. With a terrifying grind of mortar and rock, it was thrown inward. A harsh, artificial light flooded the top of the passage, followed immediately by Elias's furious roar. "Arthur! Stop where you are. You touch that hatch, and I swear I will end you myself." Elias's voice was distorted by fury, losing all pretense of civility. Lucas was right behind him, breathing heavily, holding what looked like a heavy-duty pipe wrench. I braced myself against the iron lip of the hatch. The monstrous, dragging sound from behind me was louder now, closer, accompanied by a heavy, ragged exhalation that seemed to shake the very air in the tunnel. Whatever it was closing the distance between me and the prisoner with terrifying speed. I had seconds. Behind me, the creature. Above me, Elias and Lucas ready to execute me. With a grunt of pure desperation, I wrenched the rusted bolt back. It screeched in protest, a sound drowned out instantly by the monstrous thing closing in. I shoved the hatch upward with all my strength. It opened onto a shaft of damp, cool air smelling strongly of pine and night soil. I tumbled through the opening just as the first segment of the segmented, oily horror scraped into the reach of my receding penlight beam. I fell perhaps 5 feet, landing hard on something soft and yielding. I scrambled to my feet, throwing the hatch shut over my head. It fell with a heavy clang. I frantically searched for the locking mechanism, finding a simple, heavy iron bar that I managed to slide into place just as a colossal thump reverberated through the metal above me. The sounds of Elias and Lucas attacking the exterior hatch were muffled now, but still frantic. I could hear Elias screaming orders, his voice tight with fear of the creature he'd unleashed or forgotten. I was safe, momentarily underground, somewhere far from the house. I shakily relit my penlight, sweeping the beam around. I was in a narrow drainage culvert, perhaps an old storm sewer, judging by the steady drip of water nearby. The soft thing I'd landed on was a pile of old, waterlogged burlap sacks, probably discarded construction debris. I was free of the immediate confrontation, but I was completely lost underground in the dead of night with a key to a secret deed and the horrifying knowledge that Elias Thorne wasn't just a deadbeat father, but something far worse, a keeper of subterranean horrors. I took a few tentative steps down the culvert, needing to find an exit, when my light illuminated something hanging down from the low ceiling of the pipe, directly in my path. It was the vellum letter, the one detailing the coordinates. But it wasn't taped or tied. It was hanging from a thin, almost invisible strand of silvery thread, strung tautly across the tunnel. And dangling just beneath the letter, swinging gently in the artificial breeze created by my movement, was a single thick, black viper's fang. The letter wasn't dropped. It was deliberately placed here as a marker, a sign that the sender had anticipated my path, that they were waiting for me, deeper in the darkness, and that this entire charade with Elias and Lucas was just the opening act. I slowly reached out to touch the vellum, realizing that Elias Thorne had been the distraction, not the puppet master. The real game had just begun, and I was walking directly into the hands of whoever had staged the entire scenario, waiting just around the next bend in this foul, subterranean labyrinth. My hand hovered inches from the vellum, the cold dread settling deep in my bones. The viper's fang swung lazily, an obsidian pendulum marking time toward an unknown judgment. This wasn't just a legal battle for a house. This was an entanglement with forces I couldn't fathom, forces that knew my path better than I did. The frantic pounding from the hatch above finally dissolved into frustrated silence, suggesting Elias and Lucas were either regrouping or realizing their prisoner was inaccessible. That bought me a precious few minutes. I gently plucked the vellum from the silver thread, careful not to disturb the deadly marker. I unfolded it, my penlight shaking violently. The script was the same elegant type, but this note was shorter, more direct, clearly intended for someone who had already bypassed the initial layer of deception. Arthur, you have the key. Elias only held the title, not the trust. Eleanor knew he would surface, always does. She never trusted him with the real inheritance, which is not the land, but the protection of the land. The creature upstairs is a lesser guardian, kept dormant by specific sonic frequencies. Frequencies only accessible via the original master control panel. The control panel is in the hidden vault, accessible only with the brass key. The coordinates on the first note led you here, to the overflow tunnel. The vault entrance is 50 yards forward, disguised as a natural outcropping. Do not engage Elias. He is merely clearing the brush for you. The true threat to the estate, and to your life, is the lineage itself. Go now. Use the key. Silence the guardian before Elias realizes you've found the true prize. The architect, a third player. A shadow puppeteer who had orchestrated my entire week, from the eviction notice to the discovery of the captive heir. 50 yards. I clipped the penlight to my collar, letting the beam point forward, and started moving through the fetid water, pooled in the culvert floor. Every step was a calculated risk, but the notion that Elias was merely a pawn, clearing obstacles for me, was oddly liberating. If I was the true target of this architect, then perhaps I held the leverage. The tunnel narrowed, the smell of pine and damp earth giving way to the sharper metallic scent I associated with deep earth and machinery. Rounding a bend, the rough stone walls gave way to a smoother, more deliberate construction, cut granite blocks fitted with unsettling precision. And there it was, a large slab of granite, entirely featureless except for a small recessed circular indentation, perfectly sized for the brass key in my pocket. I pulled out the key. It was cold, heavy, and felt oddly warm now that it was near its lock. I inserted it into the indentation. It turned with a smooth, oiled thunk. The granite slab didn't swing open. Instead, it retracted silently into the wall with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a small, dry vault room bathed in a faint blue emergency light. Inside, sitting atop a pedestal, was a device that looked like a fusion of antique radio equipment and modern server hardware, a complex mess of dials, glowing vacuum tubes, and several large, prominent sliders labeled with frequency markers. It was undeniably the master control panel. As I stepped into the vault, the air in the main tunnel behind me erupted. Elias and Lucas had obviously found a way through the upper hatch, perhaps by disabling the creature, or perhaps by realizing I was the one they needed to control. "He's in the vault!" Elias bellowed, his voice echoing dangerously close. "Lucas, shoot the lights out. Don't let him touch anything." I ignored them, my focus absolute. I located the main power dial, a large bakelite knob, and cranked it up to maximum. The tubes on the panel immediately flared to an alarming brightness. I scanned the sliders, looking for the one that might correlate to the guardian upstairs. One slider was marked clearly, subcortical resonance, 432 hertz. This had to be it, the frequency keeping the upstairs creature dormant. If Elias was trying to use it, I needed to counter it. I shoved the slider labeled 432 Hz all the way down to 0. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. From the tunnel behind me, where Elias and Lucas were entering, came not the sound of breaking stone or shouting, but a deafening, unified shriek of pain. The sulphurous stench vanished, replaced by a sudden sharp blast of ozone. Then silence. Absolute, profound silence. I waited, my heart pounding, the blue light of the control panel reflecting in my wide eyes. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Had I killed Elias and Lucas? Had I activated something else entirely? Slowly, cautiously, I retreated to the vault entrance and peered out. The tunnel was empty. The air was clean. The coppery smell was gone. Above, I could hear only the distant, normal sounds of the night settling over Blackwood Manor, the wind in the trees, nothing more. I stepped back into the vault, examining the device. If this controlled the Guardian, what else did it control? I examined the other sliders. One was labeled Structural Integrity, Basement Level. Another, Legacy Inheritance Access, Manual Override. This wasn't just about keeping monsters quiet. This was the master control for the entire property, likely built by Eleanor's ancestors to protect something far more valuable than land deeds. I looked at the Legacy Inheritance Access slider. It was set to off. I reached out, tracing the cool metal, and slid it firmly to on. Instantly, a small compartment on the side of the console hissed open. Inside, resting on velvet lining, was not another deed or more keys, but a single slim, leather-bound journal. Eleanor's handwriting covering the first page. Arthur, it began, dated 3 months before her death. If you are reading this, it means the legal maneuvers have failed and you have found the architect's safeguard. Elias never died. He was imprisoned by my grandfather for trafficking in something that should never see the sun. Lucas is his unwitting tool. I couldn't defeat Elias, but I could outsmart him. The key opens this control, the control that silences his hounds. The true inheritance is the truth, Arthur. Now you know what you are protecting. My relief was instantly tempered by a final, terrifying realization. If Elias and Lucas were silenced upstairs, and if I had just activated the legacy inheritance access, it meant the threat I neutralized might simply be lying dormant. Or perhaps they were now trapped inside the house while I was sealed down here, in control of a mechanism that could potentially bring the entire structure down around us all. As I stood there, journal in hand, the control panel emitted a soft, low chime, and a small red light began blinking rhythmically next to the structural integrity slider, indicating a critical drop in foundation stability. I looked at the structural slider and then back toward the darkness of the culvert I had just traversed, realizing the architect hadn't just left a test for me. They had orchestrated a collapse, and I was standing in the bunker while the house I fought to save began to crumble above me.